There was literally no one in the neighborhood in those days. At night, it was totally deserted. I mean, if you saw somebody on the street, it was like, oh my God, who's that, you know? It was different in those days. I rather liked it. It's basically one big room, but this is my little office area. Yeah, a lot of books, a lot of books. Over the years, oh, that's what happens. You just collect things, so much stuff. And this is the studio. My name is John Willenbecker, and I was born in Pennsylvania, Dutch country. And that's where I grew up. Then I went off to school, and then I came to New York. I've always been interested in art. Whether I had a consciousness that I would be an artist is another issue. I mean, I don't think that ever occurred to me until rather late. If I have any kind of an eye, it comes from my mother, who liked to collect antiques. And she had a great way of showing them in our house and so forth. She used to go antiquing all the time, and I would go along. And I found that very wonderful to look at all this stuff and, you know. I wanted to be a museum curator because I love museums, and I thought that would be a wonderful kind of life to have. And so when I went to college, I majored in art history. And then I went to the Institute of Fine Arts in New York. Came to the point where I was to write my master's thesis in order to get my MA. I went to Europe in order to look at a lot of material for that. I decided when I got there that I wasn't going to do that. I was going to just have fun. And it was during that time that I started actually making little drawings that I was interested in doing and so forth. And so then when I came back to New York, the Museum of Modern Art had an exhibition called The Art of Assemblage. It was artists who use material in their art that is not normally used in art. In other words, found objects and things glued on and objects used in various ways to make the art not just simply painting. And that was really an eye-opener for me. I realized that I was not going to get my MA, that I was not going to write my master's thesis, and that I would become an artist. So here I am, all these years later. The Art of Assemblage was in 1961. The first works that I made, they were glass-fronted boxes that had objects in them, like Cornell. I mean, they're sort of like that. And then I went on from there to other things. I think that I'd probably be a really great artist if I didn't care about anything else except my work. I recently read a quotation from Ad Reinhardt. In fact, I'll read it to you. Because I keep these little books. He said, "One paints when there is nothing else to do. After everything else is done, has been taken care of, one can take up the brush. After all the human, social needs, pressures are accounted for, only then can we be free to work." That's the way I feel. This is the painting with the gold washers. I did a bunch of paintings that look like marble. That's what got me into color, because I got interested in marble. I've always been a kind of scavenger, and I love finding things on the street. And in fact, I said somewhere that if I put a white dot on everything in this loft that I found on the street, it would look like a snowstorm. I mean, so many things. I think it's nice to have old things as well as new things. Almost never do you find collectors of art who mix the two together. It almost never happens, which I find very strange. I mean, if you have an eye for things, then why don't you also like that as well as that? And it's curious. It's curious. This was a long time ago. I was walking home and I looked across the street, and propped up on a trash can was a door that somebody was throwing out. It was a heavy metal door, but the entire door was covered with graffiti by Keith Haring, and it was very noticeably his work. I couldn't take it home with me because it was simply too heavy. It wouldn't have fit in a taxi, and I couldn't call anybody to have them come and help me, so I just left it. But I suppose if I had taken it, you know. And that happened also with Andy Warhol, whom I knew, and I was once in the factory with him, and we were looking around, and propped up on the wall were blue jackies, you know, about this big. I said to Andy, oh, you know, we should really exchange, you know. And he said, oh, great, yeah, let's do it. And what I should have done was taken one of the jackies right away and said, oh, okay, I'll take this jockey, and then, you know, we'll see. And I didn't. And so, of course, it never happened. Anyway, that's a funny story.
How did you meet Andy Warhol?
Oh, just because everybody was around in those days. You know, the art world was so small. People went to openings, I mean, and they were all there, you know. I mean, I was also very friendly with Marisol, who lived actually down here, but she was terrific. For instance, Marisol and Andy were at my first opening, the first show I had. They came to my opening, so I mean, but I mean, it was no big deal. It was like everybody was around.
What year was this opening?
64, or maybe it was 63. But see, that was a glass-fronted box. And that was Marisol and Andy and me. That was Henry Geltzeller, and this was Ruth Kligman. And Ruth Kligman was the woman who was in the automobile when they crashed and it killed Jackson Pollock, and she survived. Ruth Kligman, boy. This is a box that was owned by Tony Curtis, and that's Tony Curtis. He bought my work, and I knew him a little bit. He was a very nice guy, but that's such a funny photograph. I moved in here in 1970. I knew artists who had lofts, and I thought, well, perhaps I should try to find a loft. A particular friend of mine, Alvin Dickstein, who was an artist, had a loft 2 doors down from here. I mentioned this to him, and he said, oh, well, those people who run the cafeteria, they're looking for tenants because the manufacturers who are in the building are all moving to New Jersey. They say they want to have artists living in the building, so that's how I got here. You know, it has changed, but not a whole lot. And then here's Philip Guston. Some of you may think, why all these changes? It has taken me years to come to the conclusion that probably the only thing that one can learn is the capacity to be able to change. I think it's very profound. Anyway. I was the first person to live on this floor, but I was not the first person to live in the building. That was another person on the top floor, but yeah. The floor had been vacated. It was a floor that made printed wallpaper. And in fact, they kept the floor below mine when I moved in, and still were using it, so that all day long I heard, you know, wallpaper printers going and so forth. So, you know, and then they finally moved out, so, yeah. They specialized, this wallpaper company specialized in flocked wallpaper. It's a kind of fuzzy stuff that is on wallpaper sometimes. So when I moved in along the ceiling, there was flocking. There was a little thing of flocking along all the pipes, which I had to, you know, get rid of. And I'm sure it was very toxic stuff, you know. I didn't want to breathe it. There was an artist named Nancy Frank who had a floor, and she was a painter, and she was also, what she really did to make money was she baked specialty cakes. You know, if you wanted a cake in the shape of a house, she could bake it for you. And she had a wonderful cat named Ernie. She had a roommate who was a photographer. He took a lot of photographs of Ernie, and he wrote a book about Ernie, which is still in print. It's called Ernie. In fact, I have a copy of the book signed by Ernie. I took Ernie's paw and put it on a rubber stamp pad. And he signed the book. But Ernie was great. The floor above me had a man who was a shoe wholesaler, because this neighborhood had a lot of shoe wholesalers in those days. He had, you know, floor-to-ceiling boxes of shoes. Every time he left and I would see him, he'd say, "Be well, be well." I remember that. I used to call him Mr. Shoe Man. So, you know, and then finally, the building has become very gentrified, shall we say. The neighborhood has completely changed. It's interesting to have lived through that, but I kind of liked it in the old days better. I mean, now, you know, you have to battle the prams, you know, when you walk down the street. That's all right. All during the 70s, on the street floor, there was a cafeteria called Towers Cafeteria, and it was run by the people who owned the building. They liked artists, but there are a lot of stories about artists who went there. I mean, Richard Serra lived over on Duane Park, and I think Philip Glass lived across the street. After Towers Cafeteria, they decided to move out and sell the building, and then the Odeon came in, and that was in 1980, 85, something like that. This is sort of awful to say, but when they moved in, I kind of resented their being there, because it was like suddenly it became a kind of destination eating place, because really there was nothing else down here like that. I thought, oh, my nice quiet corner is, you know, going to pieces. I mean, I don't know, what am I going to do? This is awful, all these famous people there and photographers and carrying on, and they're a very good neighbor to me. And I know the woman who owns it, Lynn. She's terrific. They've been very nice to me, so I'm very happy. I mean, one of the things I probably wouldn't do would be to wear this sweater if I were actually working.
What do you actually wear?
Well, I had to write a paragraph or two for a little publication that was done on the 50th anniversary of my graduating class at Brown. Okay. So I wrote a couple paragraphs. I said that if there's one thing that I think that I have done in my life that I think is really great, it's that I've never had a job. I've never had to work for somebody. I've been so unbelievably lucky in so many ways. I was never a trust fund baby, but I've always somehow managed to get along. And that's been wonderful, because I've been able to keep doing what I'm doing. It's fine. I mean, I've been very lucky. Very lucky.
Are you the only artist left in the building?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Who could afford to live in, anyway, yeah. No, and there's no one else who's been here forever, no. Life changes fast. You sit down to dinner, and life as you know it ends. Can happen.
Thank you so much for watching. My photographs are featured in my upcoming photography book, Artist in Residence, which is my continued documentation of the last generation of artists who live in these incredible loft spaces across New York City, which is slowly vanishing. The best way to support this video series and these photo shoots is to pre-order the book in the description below. Thank you so much to those who've already bought the book, and thank you to those who watched the videos. It really means a lot to me and to the artists featured in them.